Recording in progress.
Welcome, everyone. This week, we have Reverend Jushin Stephyn Butcher. Jushin started his Buddhist journey in 1997, practicing in the Tibetan tradition under His Holiness Penor Rinpoche. Several Dharma names later, he found his way to Hokyoji, where he became a student of Dokai Georgesen. Jushin, otherwise known as Abiding Trust, received jukai from Dokai in 2013 and ordination in 2017. He works as a software engineer by day, teaches artificial intelligence at Johns Hopkins University by night, and resides in Cambridge, Maryland with his husband, dog, chickens, and garden. So welcome, Jushin, and we are all excited to hear your talk today. So thank you.
Good morning. Ooh, somebody's got to move. All right. There is said dog. He is not all that excited. He's trying to figure out what's going on here. It's the weekend. I should be doing fun things. Let's back up. So I have not so much a talk prepared this morning as an idiosyncratic tour through some Zen poetry. As I was getting a talk together, I sort of bored myself. So I decided that I would take a different approach. And I started looking, I have a few favorites, and I will probably dally on their verses a little more than others. But I found a few interesting books, and I tried to sort of set a course between the usual sort of obviously Zen type of poems, and then the sort of aren't the trees pretty sort of poems. So there seem to be two major themes. So yeah, let's get started, and hopefully along the way people will share any comments or anything that come up for them in the verses, which discussing poetry might be actually worse than talking about dharma, but hey, there you go. And then at the end, maybe people will want to share their own favorite poets. So this first one I thought was interesting. This is Hui Yong, whose dates are 332 to 414. So long time ago, early days of Zen in China. We go on unwinding the woof from the web of their meaning. Words of the sutras day by day leap forth. Head on, we've chased the miracle of Dharma. Here are no mere scholars. So I thought that the verse was kind of interesting because it starts out, we have this idea of, transmission outside words. And like the first poem is, yeah, we're reading the sutras. But this unwinding is an interesting way of maybe putting sutras into practice. And I like the translator, I think, did a really good job on the alliteration. So here's another. This is Miao Yin, 376 to 450. There's a typo. It said 350, and it's like, nah, I don't think that's the way it works, even in Zen. Wind and water, a steady wind scours the autumn moon from a stagnant pool. From the crystal spring, every place pure now, just as it is. Why then does karma yet coil and bind? So it's interesting because he's expressing this antinomy between, you know, everything pure as it is, and said, why is there karma still? Why is this still this coiling and binding? Hanshan is famous. He's so famous he probably didn't exist. So I always think it's funny when people talk about he's famous for the Cold Mountain poems, but he was just legendary. And it's like, well, then how is he famous for it? This is from a translation by Kazuaki Tanahashi and Peter Levitt. Let me just grab a couple of the first ones here. You ask the way to Cold Mountain, but the road does not go through. In summer, the ice is not yet melted. The morning sun remains hidden in mist. How can you get here like I did? Our minds are not the same. When your mind becomes like mine, you'll get here too. So this is a theme, and actually, I think I've put it in here. Actually, somebody actually makes fun of these so-called cold mountain hermits later on. But this was a big, this is sort of the at the time, kind of the ideal of the hermit practitioner in the mountains. I'll get to it later, but as a side note, it was also a very big thing in medieval Japan that there's this idea. There were these shaman, basically, who they lived in the mountains and they did whatever they did in the mountains, and that they got great power from it and were able to do spells and whatever. And in later medieval Japan, it was believed that sitting zazen was more powerful than that in terms of developing special powers. So Hanshan there's another one here. If you want to attain a peaceful life, settle down at Cold Mountain. Subtle breezes blow through mysterious pine. Listen closely, the sound is really good. Beneath it, someone with graying hair reads The Yellow Emperor in Lanji without ceasing. After 10 years, I can never return. I've even forgotten the way I came. So again, we see this idea. I think it's further developed with Cold Mountain as being not a place per se, but realization itself. I forgot how it came. It reminds me of Dogen saying that firewood can't become ash again. You know, I've forgotten the way that I came. And then there are some other verses. Over time, people added to the Cold Mountain poems. So it's hard to tell who actually wrote anything. Everyone who reads my poems must protect the purity of their heart's heart. Cut down your craving, continue your days modestly, coax the crooked and the bent, then you'll be upright. Drive out and chase away your evil karma. Return home and follow your true nature. On that day, you'll get the Buddha body as swiftly as Luling runs. And then for those who always wonder about everyone writing everything down in Zen, he has an answer to that too. If you're always silent and say nothing, what stories will the younger generation have to tell? If you hide yourself away in the thickest woods, how will your wisdom's light shine through? A bag of bones is not a sturdy vessel. The wind and frost do their work soon enough. Plow a stone field with a clay ox, and harvest day will never come. So as the title of Katagiri Roshi's book, you have to say something. So Hanshan, who who again may or may not have existed in 7030 was saying the same thing. You have to say something. You have to carry on to the next generation. And then, despite the obstacles, I pursued the great monk to the misty mountains, a million layers high. He pointed to the road back home, one round moon, lantern of the sky. And, this is a theme we see a lot in Zen as well, right? It's in the Fukan Zazengi. Why travel around searching when you can find it just where you are? One of my favorite, and most of his stuff, some of it is verse poetry and some of it is kind of more aphorisms or gathas, is Layman Pang. His dates are 740 to 808 in China. He's unique in that he studied with Shito and Mazu, but he decided not to ordain. And he said, literally, when asked, "No, thank you. I would like to do as I please." So he didn't want to be he didn't want anyone to be his boss. He was married. He had 2 children, and a son and a daughter. And they mostly a lot of the stories about he and his daughter. They were traveling. Merchants, craftspeople. They made bamboo utensils, and they would make the utensils and then sell them every day. And he's famous for supposedly having put all of his belongings on a boat and sunk it. And then he traveled around with his daughter. And there's no real mention of why his wife and son aren't involved. So here's one, and I think that a lot of his verses speak to us, more of us who are not, living in a monastery, for whatever reason, because he was out engaged in the world as a merchant. So, well versed in the Buddha way, I go the non-way without abandoning my ordinary person's affairs. The conditioned and name and form are all flowers in the sky. Nameless and formless, I leave birth and death. So flowers in the sky are hallucinations. And so he's just sort of saying, all of this is illusory, but he still goes on about his daily life. There's a great exchange with the master Shito that he had. He studied with Shito, then he went to study with Mazu. Shito says, "Tell me, how have you practiced Chan after coming here to this mountain?" Pang replies, "There is really nothing words can reveal about my daily life." Shito says, "It is just because I know words cannot that I ask you now." And Pang replied, "My daily activities are not unusual. I'm just naturally in harmony with them, grasping nothing, discarding nothing. In every place, there's no hindrance, no conflict. My supernatural power and marvelous activity, drawing water and carrying firewood." So we often hear the last line, but that's the start of the rest of it, where he's being questioned by his teacher, and in sort of a tricky way, and acquits himself. There's a story, just to put it in context. There's a story. Layman Pang was laying on his couch reading a sutra, and a monk came by and said, "Layman, you must maintain dignity while reading a sutra." And so he raised up one leg. And the monk had nothing to say. Here's another verse. "The past is already past. Don't try to regain it. The present does not stay. Don't try to touch it. From moment to moment, the future has not come. Don't think about it beforehand. Whatever comes to the eye, leave it be. There are no commandments to be kept. There's no filth to be cleansed. With empty mind really penetrated, the dharmas have no life. When you can be like this, you've completed the ultimate attainment. And then food and clothes sustain body and life. I advise you to learn being as it is. When it's time, I move my hermitage and go, and there's nothing to be left behind. And finally, a resolute man in the past, he's talking about himself, a resolute man in the past, but not today. I destroyed my treasures utterly and ransomed back my retinue of servants. The 6 in number always accompany before and after. I do not restrain them, and they do not venture to run away. So what are the 6 servants? Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, touch, mind. So it's kind of it's called, so it's talking about, like, I think striving and sort of, I'm gonna control everything. I'm gonna be sort of, either pious or proper or whatever. And he's talking about sort of, that's, I think, the resolute part, a resolute man in the past, but today I destroyed my treasures utterly. Of course, it also could be talking about him sinking all of this stuff. Foyan was from 1067. And I sort of like some of his stuff again, because it's, it's kind of very common everyday stuff. So it is as though you have an eye that sees all forms, but does not see itself. This is how your mind is. Its light penetrates everywhere and engulfs everything. So why does it not know itself? And he goes on, when you find peace and quiet in the midst of busyness and clamor, then towns and cities become mountain forests. Afflictions are enlightenment. Sentient beings realize true awakening. You have to actually experience stable peacefulness before you attain oneness. You cannot force understanding. Of course, Dogen, whose date, he was born in 1200 to 1258. He had a lot to say, and we read a lot of his stuff. So I just picked just a few of his that I thought were interesting. The first is one I think that we often see and read. Enlightenment is like the moon reflected on the water. The moon does not get wet, nor is the water broken. Although its light is wide and great, the moon is reflected even in a puddle an inch wide. The whole moon and the entire sky are reflected in one dewdrop on the grass. And then one of my favorites, those who see worldly life as an obstacle to dharma see no dharma in everyday actions. They have not yet discovered that there are no everyday actions outside of dharma. That might have been early Dogen. He got a little more pessimistic as the years went by. But he writes, they're interesting things. So now that we're in Japan, there are sort of 3 really there are a number of famous poets. And so I have a few here. Basui, born, this is about 1327. Who is hearing? Your physical being doesn't hear, nor does the void. Then what does? Strive to find out. Put aside your rational intellect. Give up all techniques. Just get rid of the notion of self. What is this mind? Who is hearing these sounds? Do not mistake any state for self-realization, but continue to ask yourself even more intensely, what is it that hears? So I'm always fond of people who are bringing in the sort of the concreteness of the 5/6 senses. Just stop your wandering, look penetratingly into your inherent nature, and concentrating your spiritual energy, sit in Zazen and break through. So that's a succinct summary. One of my favorite poets, and maybe even my totem animal, is Ikkyu. Ikkyu was born about 1394, and like many such people, he seems to have been, an illegitimate child of the emperor. So all of these people end up in monasteries to sort of save their lives. He is unique in that he fully embraced life in a way that was certainly atypical for Tokugawa Japan. And he, yeah, there was quite a bit. So he sort of, yeah, let me just start. Follow the rule of celibacy blindly, and you are no more than an ass. Break it, and you are only human. The spirit of Zen is manifest in ways as countless as the sands of the Ganges. Every newborn is a fruit of the conjugal bond. For how many eons have the secret blossoms been budding and fading? With a young beauty, I am engrossed in fervent love play. We sit in the pavilion, a pleasure girl and this Zen monk. I am enraptured by hugs and kisses, and I certainly do not feel as if I am burning in hell. So this is not what we generally think of in terms of the scholar monk. Ikkyu he was a famous poet. He was a calligrapher. He is credited with being the first one to sort of marry art in the Zen aesthetic, to create the Zen aesthetic. He is credited with being the originator of the tea ceremony in Japan. He has quite a few. Let me see. There's one. He liked to take the wind out of people's sails. So there's a story about him. Once a rich merchant invited a number of abbots and famous priests to a feast of vegetarian dishes. When Ikkyu showed up in a shabby robe and tattered straw hat, he was taken for a common beggar, sent around to back, given a copper coin, and ordered to leave. The next time the merchant hosted a feast, Ikkyu attended in fancy vestments. Ikkyu removed the vestments, set them before the tray. What are you doing? His host wanted to know. The food belongs to the robes, not to me, Ikkyu said as he went out the door. He didn't really, as you might imagine, it might be a little bit hard. He didn't want any students. and of course he attracted them, and they didn't always get what he was going on about. So this is a great story. Although Ikkyu never wanted students and actually discouraged those who sought him out, he was nevertheless constantly surrounded by disciples who thrived on the austerity and pure practice they learned from him. As he himself said, hard training is the essence of the Buddhas and patriarchs. Buddhas are made, not born. Some misunderstood him, however. Ikkyu had one disciple who copied Ikkyu's wild ways, sleeping on the altar among the Buddha images and using pages from the sutras as toilet paper. Ikkyu summoned him and asked, "Do you think you're a Buddha?" "Yes," the disciple replied, "we are all Buddhas. You said so yourself." "If you're a Buddha, then why use something filthy such as a sutra page for toilet paper? Doesn't a Buddha deserve something better, like clean white paper?" Ikkyu then asked. "Let me have one of your enlightenment verses." The disciple responded, "Sitting in Zazen at the 4th and 5th Avenue bridges, all the people passing by, to me just trees in a deep forest." Ikkyu screamed, "No good!" He gave this revised version. "Sitting in Zazen at the 4th and 5th Avenue bridges, all the people passing by, to me, just as they are." He had, I lost a bookmark here somehow. He had a great, oh yeah. So yeah, he has, there's so much, we could just read his poetry. Let me see if he has, let's see. So one might be, this one's a meal of fresh octopus. Lots of arms, just like Kanan the goddess, sacrificed for me, garnished with citron. I revere it so. The taste of the sea, just divine. Sorry, Buddha, this is another precept I just cannot keep. On the other hand, he was known for his great generosity, both to animals and people. He had a pet sparrow. And when the sparrow died, he wrote a commemoration scroll, honored one of the forest. I raised a small sparrow that I loved deeply. One day it suddenly died, and grief-stricken by the loss, I decided to conduct a funeral service for my little companion, just as if it were a human being. At first I called it Disciple Sparrow, but upon its death I changed it to Buddha Sparrow. Finally, I presented it with the posthumous Buddhist title, Honored One of the Forest. I composed this poem as a memorial. A 16-foot Buddha's body of pure purple and gold lies between the twin trees of nirvana, now liberated from falsehood beyond life and death, yet present in 1,000 mountains, 10,000 trees, and 100 springs. So that was Ikkyo. We could spend a lot of time on Ikkyo. He's one of my favorite. Another of sort of the three is a great book if you want to get a chance sometime. Extraordinary Zen Masters, a maverick, a master of masters, and a wandering poet, Ikkyu, Hakuen, and Rokyan. So Rokyan's dates were going now way into the about 400 years later, 1758. His poetry is not quite to my taste. It tends to be a little on the trees are pretty, but it's still awfully poignant, many of them. Where beauty is, there is ugliness. Where right is, also there is wrong. Knowledge and ignorance are interdependent. Delusion and enlightenment condition each other. Since olden times it has been so, how could it be otherwise now? Wanting to get rid of one and grab the other is merely realizing a scene of stupidity. Even if you speak of the wonder of it all, how do you deal with each thing changing? And then I have another poem here. So this one I love. This is just a verse. Since Rokun was so forgetful, he wrote himself memos and lists of various things he should remember. So this is a list of things he should remember. Take care not to talk too much, talk too fast, talk without being asked to, talk gratuitously, talk with your hands, talk about worldly affairs, talk back rudely, argue, smile condescendingly at others' words, use elegant Chinese expressions, boast, avoid speaking directly, speak with a knowing air, jump from topic to topic, use fancy words, speak of past events that cannot be changed, speak like a pedant, pedant. Avoid direct questions, speak ill of others, speak grandly of enlightenment, carry on while drunk. So don't drink, don't carry on while drunk. Speak in an obnoxious manner, yell at children, make up fantastic stories, speak while angry, drop names, ignore the people to whom you are speaking, speak sanctimoniously of gods and Buddhas, use sugary speech, use flattering speech, speak of things of which you have no knowledge, monopolize the conversation, talk about others behind their backs, speak with conceit, badmouth others, chant prayers ostentatiously, complain about the amount of alms, give long-winded sermons, speak affectedly like an artist, speak affectedly like a tea master. And so that's only one page. It goes on, the list goes on. And that was just the speaking part. So in the more slightly more recent, there's a famous, well, they're all famous. What would this be? This would be a 19th century Zen teacher in China, Zhu Yun. He wrote a bunch of verses. I just pulled out some that I thought were interesting. Experience Chan. It's not mysterious. As I see it, it boils down to cause and effect. Outside the mind, there is no dharma. So how can anybody speak of a heaven beyond? Experience Chan. It's experiencing your own nature, going with the flow everywhere and always. When you don't fake it and waste time trying to rub and polish it, your original self will always shine through brighter than bright. Experience Chan. Become a follower who, when accepted, learns how to give up his life in his death. Grasping this carefully, he comes to see clearly, and then he laughs till he topples the cold mountain ascetics. And the final one, experience Chan. There's neither distance nor intimacy. Observation is like a family treasure, whether with eyes, ears, body, nose, or tongue. It's hard to say which is the most amazing to use. And then with that, I'm going to close out with one of my favorite contemporary poets, David Whyte. I think I read this poem a long time ago. I'm going to read it again. This is called Everything is Waiting for You. Your great mistake is to act the drama as if you were alone, as if life were a progressive and cunning crime with no witness to the tiny hidden transgressions. To feel abandoned is to deny the intimacy of your surroundings. Surely even you at times have felt the grand array, the swelling presence and the chorus crowding out your solo voice. You must note the way you must note the way the soap dish enables you, or the window latch grants you freedom. Alertness is the hidden discipline of familiarity. The stairs are your mentor of things to come. The doors have always been there to frighten you, to invite you. And the tiny speaker in the phone is your dream ladder to divinity. Put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. The kettle is singing even as it pours you a drink. The cooking pots have left their arrogant aloofness and seen the good in you at last. All the birds and creatures of the world are unutterably themselves. Everything is waiting for you. And that's it. So I'm curious to see if anyone has any comments, if they have their own favorite poems or poets. Yes. Well, you unmute.
So I guess I don't have a poem to share, but I have a question about EQ. I find it interesting, like the octopus poem where, it says, "Sorry, Buddha, this is one precept I can't keep." I'm wondering, from your readings of him, if there's any way he distinguishes, like, kind of that humanness of not, obviously we're not really all Buddhas, and so the humanness of like breaking those precepts or making mistakes versus when he's like, no, I actually need to keep to this one. And, I don't know if there's any of that he mentions.
Yeah, he doesn't really explain himself. It's interesting. I think, because there's an interesting history there. They asked him to be abbot of some temple. He made it all of 10 days before he just wandered off. There's one poem is basically like, if you need to find me, I'll be in the bar or the brothel. And in later life, he became greatly enamored of a blind, I think she was a flautist and there's just a lot of erotic poetry comes out of that. So, but at the same time, he scolds his non-disciple for like doing radical radical or outrageous things. And it seems to be simply like, it's not doing these things just to do them and to shock. It's being who you are. Be who you are. Don't, putting on airs, either, celibacy or whatever the great opposite of that is not, neither of them is the way. But yeah, he doesn't really, he doesn't get down to, this is where you need to do, and this is what you don't, this is when you do it, and this is when you don't do it. It's much more organic than that.
Yeah, that's interesting, because in some of the Pali sutras, it's kind of like, how do you become a good person? Like, don't engage in lust, or don't engage in this and that. So it's just interesting that he's like, well, you can, but if it's who you are, kind of.
Yeah, and that's a tension, right? Because there's the the koan of the red thread. How what is it? Why are bodhisattvas still tethered by the red thread? And it's finding that balance. It's funny in the tantras, there's always sort of this weird thing. You'd be sitting there and so part of a tantra empowerment, you have the ceremony, it gives you the empowerment to practice that particular sadhana practice. And then they have to read the thing to you, the lung. So that gives you the the other part of it. And they'll be just reading these things, and His Holiness Penor Rinpoche would be just like reading all this stuff, and they'd be translating it, and you just all of a sudden you're just like, so don't be a prostitute unless you're naturally inclined to it. Wait, what did you just say? Surely that's a translation error. And but no, and then it'll be things like, you can only change your gender 3 times. Like, okay. So yeah, it's just weird. It's just, some of this stuff is sometimes weird, finding that. I guess it's ultimately, if you and again, it's just just taking it as it is, what's presenting, and not it's the clinging and the grasping that's the problem, because it's if you're thinking about days and days and days before you can have another drink or something like that, then that's not that's not it. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, Mary.
Well, Jushin, thank you so much. Oh man, this was fantastic. I have about 1,000 questions, but can't do that.
It's poetry. There are no answers.
Oh, I know, but just the history, and oh my gosh. But I wanted to just say, just because I had to just take this gut, you're speaking it, I can't read it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not reading it, but I just want to viscerally, because that's what I like to do on Zoom, viscerally, take it in. What I heard in the beginning poems, well, they were a little bit shorter. It seemed like then 1700s, 18. Anyway, I'm just commenting. But what I felt, the first 3 poems, I would love to even have those. There's this, I felt really deeply moved because of the sort of softness of them. And I felt like kind of a melancholy or a mourning almost. And, because, and then it's so descriptive, crooked, bent, coiling, bending karma. And then, the moon and the drop of water. I mean, wow. I don't know who translated those, but man, it just hit me like, wow. So thank you.
I do love a good turn of phrase. Yeah. We go on unwinding the woof of the web of their meaning. I want to know what the original Chinese is. So a lot of the early Chinese, right? There's a literary form, there's a form that poems take. And I think there's less of that later on. I mean, there isn't haiku, there's a formula to haiku. There has to be a season word, and then there's a turning, but in a lot of the later stuff, it's more, I think it's more just verse. Yeah. Anyone else? Rushin, you strike me as somebody who has a favorite poet. He just doesn't want to get out of his chair.
I live with this aging mind, and I can't remember. There is this verse, and I know there's a classical Chinese. When you brought that up, that there's this 4 characters, 4 characters, 4 characters, 4 characters. Next stanza, repeat, repeat, repeat. So that's what a lot of the early Chinese form is, and then so it's very, very condensed, and there's all this for a translator. There's this this all the space between the characters that they have to kind of fill in. How do these two characters relate to each other? So that's the work of the translator. And that's just it's difficult work, and a lot of times Kikan is taking this class from San Francisco Zen Center now on the Blue Cliff Records, and one of the things they're doing is they provide 6 or 7 translations of the verse, and it's really interesting because only after the 6 or 7 translations do you start to get the feel for what's actually going on. If you just stick to one, it's obvious after 2 or 3 others that no, it's not. That wasn't quite right. There's this essence going in a certain direction, but it's not completely apparent in any given translation. So it's difficult for any of this to get translated.
Yeah, classical Chinese is weird because basically anything go. I mean, there are rules, but verbs can be nouns, nouns can be verbs. Most adjectives are adjectival verbs, and there's a lot of open to interpretation.
If I did have a favorite poet, it would probably be Rilke. So it's not in the, so it's very, very Buddhist in the really, really promotes basic things, no matter how difficult, and seeing the treasure in basic things.
Yeah, he was basically, from what I can tell, he was just well liked. Everybody liked him to come and visit them. It was like they say it's like spring coming, and he just has this indefatigable good nature about him. It's just he asked for money. Let's see. Here's one. Tomorrow will mark the arrival of spring. There is no help for it. My heart beats faster and faster, and I cannot sleep. Spring comes tomorrow. Let's see. Returning home from a day of begging, sage has covered my door. Now a bunch of leaves burns with the brushwood. Silently I read the poems of Hanshan. Accompanied by the autumn wind rustling through the reeds, I stretch forth both feet and lie down. What is there to fret over? What is there to doubt? Anyone else? Aaron?
Gosh, called out. Oh my gosh.
Well, I just know you studied Chinese, so.
Yeah, it was a while.
Modern Chinese, right? Or did you?
Yeah. No. Yeah. I had a question about the Hanshan. Well, one of the poems you read, the one where afterwards you commented it's like Katagiri, you have to say something, the stories. Can you put your hands on that again?
Yeah, if you're always silent and say nothing, what stories will the younger generation have to tell? If you hide yourself away in the thickest woods, how will your wisdom's light shine through? A bag of bones is not a sturdy vessel. The wind and frost do their work soon enough. Plow a stone field with a clay ox, and the harvest day will never come.
Huh. That's a yeah.
Yeah, if you don't pass it on.
Yeah, well, it's the sort of thing. I mean, I guess with any poem, you just have to think about it a little. I'll be chewing on that one. Thank you for reading that. That's all I got. I'm sorry.
Oh,
That was great. Thank you.
Well,
oh, yeah.
next week we have also thank you, Jushin, for the talk. It was wonderful. Next week we have Shoto Spring. And upcoming events, we have Rohatsu, so get signed up for that. And you Zoom folks, don't be shy to sign up as well. After that, we have the winter practice period. And you can also connect with us on Instagram and Facebook, and I got to post it in the chat. You can donate through the chat. We did reach our goal for Give to the Max Day, so thank you, everyone. It was wonderful to see all the donations come through, so we're really appreciative of your support, and we all look forward to practicing with each other. So with that, we will close. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it.
Bye. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
Good.